Before the Zimbabwe Consumer Protection Act, there was the Zimbabwe Consumer Contract Act. Now this act protected the rights of the consumers, but this wasn't enough. There was the exemption clause that had unfair terms. So in 2019, the Zimbabwe legislature gazetted the Zimbabwe Consumer Protection Act. Now this act seeks to offer more protection to the rights and interests of consumers of goods and services in the marketplace and to eliminate unethical supplies and improper business practices. Hello viewers and welcome to our YouTube channel. My name is Mawire Sibanda and seated with me are my colleagues Keith, Pride, Clara and Melody. Today we are going to concentrate more on the Consumer Protection Law of Zimbabwe, and my colleagues and I are going to discuss the Consumer Protection Law of Zimbabwe, starting by defining our major key terms. We're going to explain our three objectives. We're going to explain the achievements that have been achieved by the Consumer Protection Act, and lastly, we are going to give our recommendations in as far as the Consumer Protection Law in Zimbabwe is concerned. Now, allow me to define the major key terms of our motion. Firstly, a consumer is a person who purchases goods and services for personal use. Now, consumer rights are the laws that safeguard the consumers during their interaction with their suppliers, binding the suppliers with legal obligations. And lastly, consumer awareness is an act of conveying information about products, goods, and services, and also a consumer right. Now, allow me not to take further much of your time, but I will allow Keith to come here and go more on our objective number one, that is awareness.
Okay, so what are we saying by consumer awareness? We are basically saying that anyone to whom goods and services are marketed and having entered voluntarily into a transaction with the supplier automatically becomes a consumer and is entitled to consumer rights. The Consumer Protection Act contains several rights that a consumer ought to know in order to protect him or herself. For example, a consumer has the right to information. A consumer has the right to be heard, to be represented, and to redress. However, we've come to realize that the big deal lies in the consumer's lack of adequate knowledge pertaining to the steps to take when a wrong has been done. Such is the responsibility of agencies such as the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe and the Consumer Protection Commission. So in the event that one has been wronged, the Commission protects consumers from unconscionable, unreasonable, unjust, or otherwise improper trade practices. Apart from this, consumers can exercise responsibilities to ensure self-protection. I'll leave this to my colleague, Mr. Shindi.
Hello guys, so in as much as consumers have rights, they also have responsibilities, and I'm going to dwell on four major responsibilities of consumers. Firstly, consumers must be aware of their rights, whereby they should visit boards like the Consumer Council of Zimbabwe, Consumer Protection Commission, or look up the act on the internet so that they can know these rights. Secondly, consumers should be cautious in the marketplace, whereby when purchasing a product, please check for the expiry date, check if the product is properly sealed in order to avoid any inconveniences. Thirdly, consumers should file complaints. In a circumstance where the consumer is unhappy with the thing of the product, whether it is false, containing anything false, the consumer should file complaints, whether with the commission or with the police. And lastly, perhaps one of the most important responsibilities of a consumer is to check for standard marks of authenticity on the product. Let's say you go in the supermarket, you're on the shelf, you want to buy sugar, check at the back, you'll see the Standard Association of Zimbabwe triangle, that's the Standard Association mark. It says this product is worthy and deemed to be worthy to be on the market. Thank you. So Mackenzie is going to follow and going to do the enforceability of these rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chinembi. And I'm going to talk about the enforcement, how consumers and the Commission enforce the rights of the consumer. So consumers generally have powers under the Consumer Protection Act to enforce their rights. The Act also makes provision of enforcement of rights in addition to recourse of the courts both in civil and criminal matters. For the benefit of the viewers, I am going to define what we mean by enforcement. Enforcement is the act of compelling observance of compliance with the law, rule of obligation. The CPA essentially allows any person who has failed to have an issue resolved through alternative resolutions to approach the Consumer Protection Commission in a prescribed manner. And then the enforcement mechanism is enshrined in section 55 to 64 of the Consumer Act. Here measures to ensure the availability of effective consumer redress mechanism in the event of violation of consumer rights through the following. The first one is introduction of dispute resolution mechanism through a voluntary arbitration conducted by a consumer protection organization. Where dispute is referred to the arbitration act will apply. And secondly, referral to the commission where disputes could be resolved through alternative disputes resolution mechanism. The matter may be referred to the commission established in terms of the act. And thirdly, enforcement through courts. This can be done through an appeal, review, and direct access. The Act also offers offense and penalties section, which is found in section 78 to 81. It gives certainty to the consumers as it clearly states the penalties to be received in the event of a breach. The consumer in the public, moreover, the Act also offers offense and penalties section that is found in section 78 to 84. It gives certainty to the consumer since it clearly states the penalties to be received in the event of a breach. The consuming public has rights, and those who provide them with services and goods, which are suppliers, are duty bound to ensure that they are aware of the rights and uphold them. Any failure to do so results in corrective or even a punitive measure being taken as follows. That is, imprisonment, payment of administrative fines, and a vicarious liability on suppliers and employers. The Act is also in line with the international standards such as the United Nations Guidelines for Consumer Protection, whose objective is to achieve and maintain adequate protection legislation, enforcement institutions, and redress mechanisms as illustrated. And however, in Zimbabwe, it is difficult to enforce the consumer protection laws, mainly due to the fact that most consumers are not aware, as mentioned earlier by my colleagues. Most consumers are not aware of their rights, therefore cannot enforce them. Consumers also in our country cannot afford to get redress, as this is very expensive and beyond the reach of many. The Consumer Protection Commission covers a variety of aspects regarding consumers. These include protecting consumers from unconscious, unreasonable, unjust, improper practices, as well as deceptive and misleading business practices inside and outside Zimbabwe. But in some situations, this is not the case. For instance, in some supermarkets, as observed, they do not display to the consumer the price of the goods, which is in contravention of Section 26(2) of the Consumer Act. Therefore, we cannot say the rights of the consumer are enforced. Also, looking at the Zimbabwean economy, it is mostly difficult to enforce the Consumer Protection Act in Zimbabwe, largely because the economy of Zimbabwe is more characterized with the informal sector, which most of the traders are not registered. Therefore, it is very difficult to enforce the Consumer Act of Zimbabwe. And Clara will give more clarity on the achievements that have been made by the Consumer Protection Act.
Thank you, Melody.
in light of the achievements that have been achieved by the coming in of the Consumer Protection Act, it can be noted that the Consumer Protection Act, it actually states in sufficient detail certain fundamental rights that consumer have. Under those rights, there is the right to safety and health, there is the right to be informed, and it's also the right to choose. You'd also see in this said act that these rights, they are actually stated in sufficient detail, which is relevant to the consumers. And also, what is important in terms of this act is that now there's also the coming in of the Consumer Protection Commission. This commission, its existence sanctioned by Section 10 of the Consumer Protection Act. The functions of this commission, they are many, and they are actually stipulated also in detail. In the event of a breach, any consumer has got the right to approach these offices and state his grievances in detail. Therefore, it is worthy to mention that indeed the coming in of the commission in itself is an achievement on the part of the consumers. Also, it is important to mention that the Consumer Protection Act is now in line with the international standards. When we talk about international standards, what are we talking about? We are talking about the UN guidelines. The UN guidelines in themselves, they clearly mention the rights that are actually enshrined in the said act. And also the SADA guidelines on consumers, it also mentions about the same rights. Therefore, we can actually mention that the said act, it's now at standard level within the international scope. And also, it is also important to mention that the act in itself, it now provides penalties, offenses under the said act. Therefore, in the event of a breach of a consumer right, there is also the Consumer Act protection. It has actually established platforms for redressal. When we are talking about platforms for redressal, we are saying that in the event of a breach, there are certain steps that one can take for redress, whether it is criminal or it is civil. And also the commission in itself, it is also there to address any forms of breaches of our consumer rights. And also there is Section 78 and Section 81. It also mentions about corrective and putative measures that can be taken in the event of the breach of any of the rights that are enshrined in the Consumer Protection Act. Therefore, one can safely say that the coming in of the Consumer Protection Act has been an achievement to the consumers. It has actually shed more light. It has actually given us more rights, more entitlements. It's now left to the consumers to enforce these rights, to learn more about these rights, such that in the event of a breach, you are well informed of the possible steps to take and the redress that you are supposed to be entitled to. At this particular moment, I'll hand over to Serene.
Thank you very much, Clara. And lastly, allow me to say that my colleagues and I have done justice to the consumer protection law in Zimbabwe, as we have managed to define the major key terms in as far as the consumer protection law is concerned. We have outlined our major objectives and we have explained them to you. And lastly, we have managed to outline the achievements and explain them clearly. So allow me to thank my colleagues here and thank you also viewers for watching. And lastly, I would like to thank our supervisor and our lecturer, Mr. Nkosana Maphosa. With this, have a good day.